So the new parliamentary administration is in place, and the MK Party and the Progressive Caucus are at it again. Would you know it, their very first point that they want to raise in the new parliament is expropriation without compensation. You know that old chestnut, which they did in the sixth administration? Yeah, they want to revisit that one. Anyway, before we get into the video, ladies and gentlemen, please do the usual YouTube thing. Like, share, and subscribe to this video. Over 60% of our audience are not subscribed. If you subscribe to this channel, it really does help us out. So please hit that subscribe button and continue watching our work. Anyway, to the video. So the first order of the MK Party was, and I quote, "We shall fight for expropriation of land without compensation for equitable redistribution," says Judge John Hlophe. Now, an interesting comment was made during the parliamentary debates, and that is, can we still call him Judge John Hlophe? I mean, he was impeached. He's not a judge anymore. He didn't have that title when he left office because he got impeached. Anyway, if we all recall, Parliament went through a extended period of discussions with communities, which were usually hijacked by EFF members, and they discussed whether or not we should expropriate all the land. The expropriation bill then ultimately went before Parliament, and Parliament voted on it. Now, they did need 2/3 majority in order to be able to pass the bill, but it was defeated. And the reason it was defeated was the EFF and the ANC could not agree on how much of the land needed to be expropriated. According to the ANC, they would expropriate some of the land, typically disused land, and the EFF were like, nah, we want all of it. This idea of the wholesale nationalization of the land and placing it all within the custodianship of the state was ultimately what caused it to fail. But this should all come as no surprise, because John Schlaubert has made it clear that the MK Party's position on the South African legal system is that ultimately it's based on Roman Dutch law. And what Schlaubert wants, the MK Party itself wants, is a return to some kind of African law. Now, this in itself becomes interesting, because this Africanization of the law, according to the MK, and to a degree even the EFF, if you use forms of Roman Dutch law to prosecute any EFF member or any MK Party member, well, you see, that's not real justice. That's like abuse of the state and using justice to your own means. And this was specifically the case when the EFF Secretary General recently was convicted for the crime of assault. Schlaubert, being a member of the Progressive Caucus, ran to his fellow progressives' aid and did say that the only reason that he was actually convicted was because the state conspired against him, not that he broke the law. But this should come as no surprise. For those of you who don't know, the reason that John Schlaubert himself was disbarred from being a judge was because of the Jacob Zuma arms deal. The Jacob Zuma arms deal from 2008 was supposedly influenced by John Schlaubert, who at the time went to 2 constitutional court judges and asked them to rule in Jacob Zuma's favor. This ultimately landed up in John Schlaubert being found guilty of gross misconduct in 2021, after which the House overwhelmingly voted in the majority to remove Schlaubert as a judge from the bench. However, this wasn't the only real controversy that John Schlaubert experienced. He was also accused of having interfered in the case of Bongo, specifically against the parliamentary inquiry into state capture at Eskom. Schlaubert ultimately acquitted Bongo and said no corruption at Eskom, but the actual acquittal was ultimately overturned by the Supreme Court of Appeal, who found that Schlaubert had made several mistakes in law and ultimately ordered a retrial of the case itself. Interestingly, whilst Schlaubert had done this all to protect Bongo, Bongo was ultimately one of the MPs who voted to have Schlaubert removed. So what type of individual is Schlaubert shaping out to be? Well, Gayton Mckenzie had this observation to make.
I want to say to Honorable Judge Schlaubert, I'm sitting there and I'm shocked because you, Honorable Judge, have sent many of my old friends to jail with Roman Dutch law, which you enjoyed. You, while you were getting you talked about the blue lights, while you were getting the perks of the judge, being a judge, you never saw something wrong with blue light, you never saw something wrong with Roman Dutch law. Today, when you're no longer there, now you are seeing something wrong with Roman Dutch law. It cannot be. I'm going to pay for an appeal for everybody that has been sentenced by you, because you sentenced them with the wrong law according to you. Thank you very much, Honorable.
So yes, ultimately, very interesting individual. An individual who doesn't like Roman justice law, but ultimately loves to use it for their own benefits. And this is exactly what we have recently seen, specifically with references to the KZN formation of the legislator. During the formation of the legislator, numerous instances of arguments have come up, and many of these arguments have been put towards the legislator, who have described them as being irrational, unreasonable, and unconstitutional. Many instances, the case has been made by the MK party in that area have been held to be without any form of basis or based on a degree of fallacy. The actual applications themselves have been described as constitutionally evasive, and in many instances it has been argued that they've only been there for the purposes of obstructing the legislature and performing its functions. None of this comes as a surprise. So, coming on to the point at hand. During the MK party's rebuttal to Ramaphosa's initial maiden speech, they came across and said there was no real need for the GNU. The ANC could have done numerous other things that didn't include the GNU. You know, like parting with the MK party. I mean, that would be much better, right? And they accused Ramaphosa of basically lying. They suggested that Ramaphosa's claim to have created 2 million jobs during his last term was a lie, and that the GNU itself was just an attempt by the ANC to retain Cyril Ramaphosa and keep him in power. He said that the only reason Cyril Ramaphosa wanted to remain in power anyway was because of the Blue Light Brigades, nothing more. Schlaubert added that what we actually need in this country is a Nigerian revolution. He said the agriculture is readily available, but what they don't have is the land. If we were to return the land, this would solve many of the country's problems. Now, for those of you who don't know, an agrarian revolution is basically a return to subsistence farming. You know, that local township type farming, where you plant 3 vegetables and, have a small little crop of 10 carrots. That is Schlaubert's answer to actually saving the economy. The upshot of all of this was actually nicely succinctly captured by the ANC's MP Oscar, who said principles of the current government were to include the rule of law, non-sexism, non-racialism, social justice, redress, and equity, as well as the elimination of poverty. He said, "For me, House Chair, any person against such a novel principled GNU, government and national unity, is a danger to democracy and the prosperity of modern society." This all becomes very interesting, because recently John Hlophe was put forward for the Judicial Services Commission as the actual party who would sit there representing Parliament during the appointment of judges. All of this raises the fundamental question, which has been raised by Freedom Under Law. Why would you pit a former judge who was kicked off the bench for corruption, a judge who hates the very legal system he claims to represent and wants to transform the actual system itself into something that he can manipulate in a position of power? Any way we look at it, what can be said is that this new administration, with the MK party and the EFF and the opposition banks, is certainly shaping out to be an interesting one. You see, what is typically seeming to occur in the daily occurrence of Parliament is that the GNU members of staff are looking rather competent, and their competence is passing asperges onto the actual opposition. This is something we haven't typically seen before, and I for one assume that as time goes by, the EFF and the MK party will become less legitimate in the eyes of the electorate. Anyway, that's my views. Let me know what your views are in the comment section below. Until next time.